When digital transformations fail, people oftentimes think it's the fault of the software or the system integrator that they might have hired to help with the transformation, but oftentimes it's internal organizational dysfunctions that undermine and ultimately doom a digital transformation. And that's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And one of the key things we find when working with our clients throughout the world is that internal dynamics and internal dysfunctions are very powerful. They can undermine a project, they can create a failure at the end of the day. And a lot of organizations don't understand how these dysfunctions and some of the broken DNA of their own organization can undermine the success of a digital transformation. So what I want to talk about today are those 5 things and those 5 common organizational dysfunctions that we most commonly see when working with organizations in their digital transformations. And these are the 5 things you want to make sure that you address and mitigate as a key risk in your digital transformation. And be sure you stay tuned to the end of the video because I'm going to give you some resources and tips on how to address these and other dysfunctions that your organization might be experiencing. One of the most powerful forces that can doom any digital transformation is a lack of executive buy-in and support. And this is one of the most common things we see, especially in our project recoveries, in our expert witness engagements where we're working with projects that have already failed. Oftentimes we can trace back a lot of those challenges back to the fact that we didn't have adequate executive buy-in and support. And oftentimes executives think that by approving a project, by signing the checks to pay for a project, by getting a weekly or a monthly status update on the project, that constitutes executive buy-in and support. However, executive buy-in and support goes well beyond just approving the project, getting a quick update every so often, and paying the bills. What executive buy-in and support ultimately means, and what it really needs to mean to organizations, is they need to roll up their sleeves and make key decisions around what they want to be as an organization when they grow up. What is our future operating model going to look like? What is our organization going to look like? What are roles and responsibilities going to look like? Are we going to restructure our business as part of this transformation? How does this overall transformation support our overall overarching goals and objectives and strategies as an organization? Those are decisions that only executives can or should make, and that is what constitutes buy-in and support. Now, obviously, you want your executives to approve the project, to walk the talk, to communicate to the organization what this project means and how they can contribute to the overall success of the project. We want to make sure that executives are providing the resources to the project to ensure that it can be successful. Those are all important as well, but oftentimes the failures of executive buy-in and support traces back to a more fundamental lack of decision-making. And so it's very important that executives don't view this as an opportunity just to delegate the entire project to a project team. There are certain key decisions that should rest solely on that executive team, and that's one of the key dysfunctions that any organization needs to mitigate as part of its digital transformation. Lack of alignment is another common dysfunction that we see in organizations going through digital transformations. Now, organizations in general don't just become misaligned because they're going through a digital transformation. Oftentimes they're misaligned in general, and then they try to go through a digital transformation, and the fact that they're misaligned becomes exposed and it undermines the ability to be effective in the digital transformation. So what we need to do is ensure that we're aligned and we're on the same page, we're rowing the same direction, we have actual tailwinds supporting the project rather than headwinds. And when we have misalignment, we certainly have headwinds. If we're viewing the world differently and have different goals and objectives and don't have the same common direction that we're headed as an organization, it's nearly impossible for that digital transformation to succeed in that environment. That friction, that tension, those headwinds, that's going to slow down your project more than just about anything else in a transformation. So one of the biggest things you can do to ensure that you're successful is to ensure that you have that executive alignment and alignment throughout the organization on how this digital transformation is going to look, what the key decisions are that go into that, how we're going to execute it, how it ties back to our overall strategy. All that stuff we need key alignment or core alignment on before we can be successful in a transformation. Now, for more information on this, check out my YouTube channel. I have a video out there that talks about executive alignment and how to get alignment, and it gives some frameworks and an overall process for how you can ensure that you have executive alignment and that you have the right decisions that support your overall digital transformation. When organizations go through digital transformations, they typically are the first to admit that they're not experts in digital transformation. It's not what they do for a living. They have other things they're good at, but digital transformation is typically not one of those things. And most organizations don't have a lot of experience with transformations either. So what ends up happening is this lack of knowledge, this lack of experience inevitably leads to an unhealthy dependency on outside vendors. Vendors such as software providers, system integrators, third-party consultants, anyone supporting the overall project. And that's okay. You want to leverage that outside experience. I'm not suggesting that you don't. But what you don't want to do is have such an imbalance between your internal resources and your internal involvement and support of the project related to or relative to the vendor supporting the project. So what happens is oftentimes because organizations don't have experience, they abdicate responsibility to their vendors, and the vendors end up taking control and taking over the project, and oftentimes taking the project in a direction that is not aligned with the goals and objectives of the organization. In addition, that unhealthy dependency oftentimes leads to nefarious behavior, such as consultants overbilling on projects and spending too much time and money that is your time and money. So making sure that you don't overly depend on those resources, that you manage those resources, and that you don't get steamrolled by those outside resources is extremely important. So this is a common dysfunction that we see evolve throughout transformation. So one of the key things you can do is educate yourself. Make sure you've educated yourself as much as you can. Not that you're going to become an expert overnight on digital transformation, but there's a lot you can do to inform yourself, educate yourself, read up on best practices, look for technology agnostic advice and thought leadership from organizations such as Third Stage, where I work. Those are just some examples of ways that you can educate yourself so that you can become more of an equal partner with your vendors rather than someone who has an unhealthy dependency on those partners. More often than not, organizations tend to underestimate the magnitude of change that they're about to go through. This is especially true for organizations that are upgrading from a legacy product to another product from the same vendor. For example, if you're moving from SAP ECC to S/4HANA, or if you're moving from Oracle e-Business Suite to Oracle Fusion or Oracle Cloud. Those are just two examples of situations where organizations feel like it's a relatively incremental improvement. We're simply upgrading the technology. It's not that big of a deal. Well, it is that big of a deal, especially in today's day and age where most new flagship products from the leading vendors are complete rewrites of older technologies that are meant now to be delivered in the cloud. These are completely new products. These are not incremental changes. These are not incremental improvements to an existing product. These are, for all intents and purposes, completely new systems that involve a re-implementation, even if it's from the same vendor that you're already working with. So that's one example of an organization that underestimates the magnitude of change. An even more common or a more extreme example of underestimating magnitude of change is that organization that's using an old legacy-based AS400 or mainframe system that they developed in-house 20 or 30 years ago. Everyone recognizes that the technology is outdated, it's old, they're craving something newer and better. Therefore, they want to look for something that's modern, it's cloud, it got all the newest capabilities. And so there's a perceived notion that that organization is not going to have that much trouble adjusting to the new technology because they're ready for it. Well, the reality is that is just a massive change to go from an old legacy system to a current cloud modern system. That's a big jump. And most organizations underestimate the magnitude of that quantum leap, the impact it has to their operations, the impact it will have to their organization, the impact it will have to their overall strategy. All those things are going to be affected by the transformation. So it's important to recognize that the magnitude of change you're going through is probably greater than you think. And this is one of the common dysfunctions we see, is that organizations underestimate the level of change that they're about to experience. Finally, but certainly not least importantly, is the fact that many organizations are dysfunctional in that they have unrealistic expectations for what the transformation is going to take. They underestimate the project timeline, they underestimate the budget, they underestimate the change management inputs and efforts that are required, They underestimate the impact that this will have on their IT department, the impact it will have on their overall infrastructure, and therefore they don't have a plan with adequate time, resources, and budgets to address those and other challenges. Now, one of the key reasons for this dysfunction is for one of the reasons I mentioned before, which is that organizations generally don't know better. They don't have a lot of experience with digital transformations, so they defer to their vendors and believe their vendors when they come in with an aggressive timeline or an aggressive budget or an unrealistic timeline and budget. And we also have to keep in mind that software vendors and sales reps from our outside vendors are typically trying to sell us services, and they are incentivized, quite frankly, to underestimate the level of time, cost, and risk associated with acquiring their technology and services. So we have to take that all with a grain of salt and sanitize the proposals that we get from outside vendors and create something that's realistic for us. And that's probably the best way that we can mitigate and neutralize that dysfunction that I mentioned here. In addition to having a realistic understanding of what our project timeline and cost is going to be, we want to have a realistic project plan. We want to have a realistic change management plan and strategy. We want to make sure that we also have a solid implementation readiness foundation. Even once we've selected the technologies that we're going to deploy, we want to make sure that we have a solid blueprint for what our business processes are going to look like, what our organization is going to look like, how we're going to tie together different systems. The more work we can do up front in that implementation planning and that implementation readiness, the more we're going to be able to neutralize this common dysfunction that I mentioned here. So these are just 5 of the common dysfunctions that we see in organizations. This is something that should be mitigated as part of your organizational change strategy and your overall digital strategy. And to help you further unpack this whole concept, I've included a number of resources below that are meant to help you understand digital strategy, organizational change strategies, and other best practices for digital transformations. So I encourage you to download some of those resources below. 2 in particular that might be of interest would be our annual digital transformation report, which provides best practices and software rankings and independent reviews of different technologies available in the marketplace, as well as general best practices for digital transformations. And I've also included a link to our organizational change management guide. That's meant to provide you best practices on how to address some of the organizational nuances and dynamics of digital transformation from a people perspective. So I encourage you to check out those 2 resources as well as other links and resources I've included below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.